Alright, the last video got cut short, and I don't really feel like repeating myself, so I guess this Lord of the Rings discussion will be split into two videos. So I think the first video ended up being like 12 minutes or something like that, so let's go ahead and get straight into it. We were talking about hobbits and how the deeds of, everyday common folk can really change the game. We can really start to make a difference in the world. And my buddy who lives out in LA, he always calls LA, it's like Mordor out there, and I come from London, which is a small town in Ohio, and he always jokes, he's like, man, London's like the Shire, it's real calm and peaceful, and then when you get to the big city like LA, it's gets kind of crazy. So I'm trying to think of what other topics. We've already discussed a little bit of the symbolism of the ring, and the ring represents eternity too, binding. That's kind of binding is the energy of Saturn. Saturn is responsible for that as well. The figures of the 9 ring rays. So the 9 mortal men that were given the rings, and I'm sure it goes into the lore, more extensively in the lore and such, but they basically sold their soul over to Sauron without really knowing it. And it's this whole, you see this as a theme in the whole movie, this hunger for power, always wanting more and more and more. And even Saruman, who was once like a wise and benevolent wizard, he even gets tainted by the dark teachings and such of Sauron. Sometimes that curiosity, that thirst for power, it ended up making him into a destructive wizard in the end. The temptations of the dark side. Oh yeah, we were going to talk about the 9 ring rays. Let me see if I can just pull up like a quick interesting lore on the 9 ring rays, if I can spell it right. But yeah, essentially they sold their souls over, and now they're like kind of these like shades or ghost people. So I think it's really interesting. And the leader of them is called a Witch King. I can't remember how you pronounce his name. So I'm looking at the website, Lord of the Rings fandom.com, lotr.fandom.com. The Nazgul, which is black speech for ring rays, also known as Black Riders, the 9, and there's symbolism in the number 9. 9 is kind of a number of deception. It has positive and negative attributes. That's one of the meanings, but it's also 3 times, so I think there's some significance in that as well. The dreaded ring servants of the Dark Lord Sauron in Middle-earth, and they have this interesting like telepathic connection with the ring. When somebody puts the ring on, they're drawn to it, and you kind of get this whole idea of like magical talismans, and the ring is like one of these magical items. It's probably the most magical item of the entire book. In the earlier stories you have the Cimmerils, which are, I forget what the Cimmerils are made out of, but they're really powerful artifacts, basically like essence of the god type stuff. So the ring is more of a dark artifact. 19 rings of power were made in Aragon, forged by Celebrimbor. And see, this is why I'm not reading much of the lore, because it's just, you can look it up. It's really easy to look up online. I'm sure there's YouTube videos of people who do, far more extensive lore. I just want to give you like some of my kind of inner, my interpretations and kind of my flavor to it all. But yeah, the psychic connection they have with the ring is very interesting. They're drawn to it, they're attached to it, they're always connected to the all-seeing eye of Sauron, and that's something else I wanted to talk about. So the eye of Sauron is actually like the negative version of the all-seeing eye. Usually the all-seeing eye represents the omnipresence of deity or the supreme source, because it's everywhere and nowhere all at once. Otherwise, how could it be source if it were not so? And it's manifested in different forms, such as in the Bible, the Son of God. Jesus is God manifested as a man in physical form. They are one and the same. So you get all these different interesting variations of the one eye, the meaning of the one eye. But it represents omnipresence as well. And realizing that we are, if we realize that we are that one seeing eye, we are one with Source, but in a denser and more condensed form. We are one ray of the ultimate divine spark. It's important to remember that. But yeah, the eye is definitely being used in a negative term, or in a negative connotation in the Lord of the Rings. But it's not always the case. But many times the eye can be used as a, like, what is it, 1984, George Orwell and stuff, when you see the eye, their security of every single thing that's, Orwellian society where everything is, under watch and stuff. They're watching every move. So that would be kind of the negative version of the evil eye as well. "19 Rings of Power" were made by this Celebrimor. They were locked away in one of the safes of Aragon, but 16 of them were captured by Sauron. So Sauron took 16 of the rings. He gave 9 of them to great lords and warriors of men, including 3 Númenóreans. So there's 3 Númenóreans and 1 Easterling king. Sauron succeeded in corrupting the powerful 9 through his dominance over the rings. So Sauron already had control over the rings. These 9 used the rings to achieve great power. Oh, the ads on this are so annoying. Okay, it keeps moving up. These 9 used the rings to achieve great power, wealth, and prestige in life, but as time passed, the rings continued to exert a corrupting influence. So it made them powerful, it made them, be able to dominate and basically excel, but it came at a cost, too, of basically their souls. The rings eventually rendered their bearers invisible to all but those who could see into the Wraith world, kind of similar to the astral realm in a way, and enslaved them to the will of Sauron. Their lives and their powers became bound to Sauron's via the One Ring. As Sauron grew or diminished, so too did the Nazgul. Ringwraiths may have been among the first and most powerful Númenóreans to be corrupted by Sauron. 1,000 years before the downfall, they revered Sauron and became ensnared in his designs because of their lust for power of knowledge. Only 2 of the 9 were ever named: the Witch King of Angmar, that's what it was, and Khamûl the Easterling. Interesting they call him a Witch King. So yeah, that's all the lore I'm going to read on, the Ringwraiths. There's like a whole long page, like there's all kinds of stuff going on here. But yeah, that's it's all online for free, most of that stuff, so go check it out. Go buy the movies if you haven't bought the movies before, or watch them on like Amazon Prime or something. I think they have them on there, along with the Rings of Power. Well, anyway, that gives us a pretty good idea on the Ringwraiths. So it already gets pretty deep, even if you dig in just that little bit. Elves are interesting too, because elves are kind of like humans in the series, but elves, they kind of almost remind me of like Atlanteans or like Lumerians. They're more from like ancient civilized. Wow, if I could talk. They're more ancient civilization-like, or more advanced civilization-like. They kind of remind you of the people who live in the Bible too. They live for hundreds of years, they have extended life. But the elves are basically immortal for the most part, until they go into the Grey Havens and sail into the West. And of course, we've talked about the symbolism of the West many times on this channel. The element of water, Archangel Gabriel, baptism takes place in the West. The sun sets in the west, so that represents the close of the journey or the close of the day. So when the elves go into the west, they're going there to basically enjoy their immortality before they die on Middle Earth, because their souls at some point usually just wither away. Well, they say that Arwen was going to live forever, basically, while Aragorn just withered away because he was immortal. Amortal, not immortal. He was immortal, but a mortal that lives much longer, because I think he's something like 80 years old or something in the Lord of the Rings movies, but he has the appearance of being, maybe like 45, 50 at oldest, but he's pretty old. But Arwen chose to stay behind, in Middle Earth rather than retiring into the West and going with her people, and that's kind of what makes the love story really beautiful, in my opinion, the whole Arwen and Aragorn thing. Very pure love. And actually, this bookmark right here, glad I have this one. And I would rather spend one lifetime with you than face all the ages of this world alone. So it's really, really beautiful. I like it. And you hear that kind of love story a lot, like one is immortal, kind of the whole Twilight thing with the vampires. But at least in that, he was able to make her a vampire, Arwen can't make Aragorn an elf. At least as far as I know, she can't. So at some point, he's going to pass. But at least she can enjoy every day that she gets to with him, and that's beautiful, I think. So elves being kind of like, in my opinion, where humans are evolving towards. They're evolving to become more elf-like. It's funny, you compare and contrast like the dwarven culture with the elven culture. The elves are more like mystery school adept, like I see them as like these magicians and stuff, and they live in like a higher vibratory rate. Their wine's really strong because they're just really quick, intelligent beings. Their senses are high, they perceive in different realms of existence. They have really good hearing, really good seeing. Whereas the dwarves are a little more like stubborn, and they're a little more primitive, but the pride of a dwarf, when used in the correct manner and channeled in the right way, is a very powerful thing. I have a lot of respect for the dwarves, but I really like the elves the most. And I think, humankind, as we evolve in consciousness and come into this new aeon and we work in spiritual practices and spiritual knowledge, we can evolve the human race to be more like the elves. Of course, you have the talking trees, the Ents, in the Lord of the Rings, and they say that like plants and stuff, they're learning that plants do communicate. Even when people say negative things about them, they're sending off, like the forest is able to communicate with itself. So, and the ancients have always known this, that the trees are alive, like nature is alive, it's very conscious. And I think back in ancient times when the earth wasn't so polluted and such a harmful place to live in, compared to what it once was, there was all kinds of life teeming, on this planet. Strange and mysterious and powerful, all one cosmic, grand network. So I'm just looking through the chapters of the Fellowship of the Ring and trying to see if there's any other just general lore I can think about in my mind. And I think there's not really I can say too much on top of people who cover actual lore videos of the Lord of the Rings. I could go through and like make notes and all this stuff, but I think if you've watched my channel enough, you're gonna pick up on all the little like occulty, like esoteric things in the book. Like you're gonna be like, oh, they're talking about like the dawn, they're referring to it maybe symbolically, or like the sun setting in the west, or just something that's, something that, correlates with something else that we've talked about on this channel before. The Lord of the Rings, it's a great story. I love the music. I love all of it. It's a very nostalgic thing for me, this whole series. Of course, the Fellowship of the Ring forms. They take the ring and they go towards Mordor. I do think the video is funny when it says how the Lord of the Rings should have ended, and it shows them all just like riding the birds and stuff and dropping the ring like over the volcano, like into the fire. Yeah. But then there would have really been no story, so I'm sure J.R.R. Tolkien, with his, as smart as he was, I think he went to like Oxford or one of those fancy colleges and was probably in some secret societies himself, along with like C.S. Lewis. Those guys were on top of their game. They were really, servicing humanity through their stories and stuff, and really handing the mysteries down in kind of a covert way that's not really direct, but they're still teaching the mystical teachings, teaching the morals and such. You can just YouTube if you want like Gandalf quotes. There's so many great Gandalf quotes in The Lord of the Rings, and even some of the other characters' quotes through all of these movies, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. And one of my favorites is, Frodo says, I wish this wouldn't have happened to me, all this crazy, terrible stuff that's happening. And Gandalf says, so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to do is decide what to do at the time that is given to us. And I think that's really beautiful. That's the super awesome part of the story. I'm gonna go check on little baby real quick. I think he is still napping. I have my door wide open and I don't hear anything, so I will be right back. Yes, little baby is napping. I'm glad he's still napping. Normally he would wake up by now, but this is his first real good nap of the day. What else should I cover? This video probably won't be too much longer, unless I get to rambling on about some other topic I can find. The Balrog, and the whole part where Gandalf gets dragged down there. I think that's really symbolic of the whole, Gandalf becoming Gandalf the White. This is, on the Tree of Life, you could see Gandalf the Grey as like the sphere of Hokmah. And really through the transformational process, unity consciousness, working in the abyss, crossing the abyss and all that, as they're falling down, the battle of darkness, of light and darkness, good and evil. And they even fall on the water, like it shows Gandalf and the Balrog falling into the cave, and it brings to mind like the opening passages of Genesis, where it's upon the face of the waters God said, let there be light, and there was light. So I think that, whoa, the computer just paused. That was really weird, the music. But anyway, Gandalf transforming into Gandalf the White, and this is like moving up from Hokmah, which is the gray sphere, to Kether, which is the white sphere. He's become the White Wizard. The whole archetype of Scorpio, we've talked about that. Scorpio represents transformation. The whole part with the Mirror of Galadriel, because Galadriel is another one of those elves, that has a ring of power. So the whole part where Frodo's looking into the water, he sees a potential future, but it's not the future that ends up actually manifesting. But she says if you fail, that is what will happen. It's almost reminiscent of like a tarot card reading, but it's really more like crystal ball gazing, and that's a whole different topic. That's actually in the Liber 420 book I have. There's a whole chapter dedicated to like crystal ball gazing, and it's kind of along the whole lines of the Sefer Raziel thing that we've gotten into. They do a lot of like crystal ball gazing and incense burning and stuff like that. So it's kind of reminiscent. The whole Galadriel reflection pool is reminiscent of that in a way. The whole Return of the King, and I think that whole idea, you know, that Gondor doesn't have like a real king, it's the steward. It's kind of like the shape that the world's in right now. Like, you have all these rulers that are divided, you know, but you need people like a real king to kind of step in and real true righteousness to be, you know, what people are really about. Like, we need to just, you know, promote freedom of the individual while making sure everyone's taken care of too. It's, this is the grand temple. The world we live in is the school. You know, Earth is the grand school, the great mystery school. Let's help all our brothers and sisters along this path of returning to Source. Or I guess if you walk the left-hand path of separating from Source completely and creating a new reality. I need to read through Kabbalah, Qliphoth, and Goetic Magic the rest of the way. Some really deep, interesting, dark, but important material in that book for understanding the nature of reality and why the dark side exists, and how shadow plays its role in creating even greater light and potentials for, you know, benevolent manifestations to take place. We already talked about Saruman being like this corrupt wizard. He got too power hungry. And the Palantir, I think that's what it's called, the little ball that he uses, those easily corrupt people too. And Sauron's able to like see through those, so that's a whole like telepathic, you know, we just talked about crystal balls and stuff. That's always been a part of like John Dee, you know, he was the magician for the queen and all that stuff. That's super interesting topic. We haven't really covered that in detail at all on this channel. We've maybe talked about that just a little bit, but that's a topic that's really cool to get into as well. You've got Gollum, which Gollum, like, he has the whole split personality thing, and the whole ring, his hunger for the ring and all that stuff, it's terrible because he's so focused on getting the ring back that just all that, even though the ring has great power, I feel like my glasses are glaring on that screen. I'm sorry. I wish I could, I don't know, I'll just put the computer back further. But yeah, basically the ring shows how one can become corrupted by it, by greed and all of these things. And Gollum was like the supreme example. He ended up killing, was it Diggory? I don't think that's right. No, I'm thinking of Harry Potter. I can't think of the other. They're not hobbits, but they were river folk, and he killed like his brother or his friend because he was so intent on getting the ring, and it basically turned him into this creature. And that's what it shows us, like when humans have such a vicious habit that it really turns you like into a monster. And we see those kinds of things, you know, every day in the world. You know, just awful street drugs and things that, you know, it basically turns these people into, I don't know, it's almost, it's scary. It's like being possessed by just dark energy, or almost spirits, demonic type spirits. But it's not even the same as like the demons of Solomon and stuff. That's a whole different topic that we're not going to get into that right now. But basically, yeah, Smeagol, Gollum, whatever you want to call him, he's an example of, you know, how something like that, whether it be an object or whatever, you know, corrupts someone to their core. And then they're not even like one individual anymore. It's split into two people. One is the ring itself, and one is the original Gollum, or Smeagol. Of course, Master Samwise Gamgee. It's good that Frodo has him on this journey. And everyone kind of needs a Sam Gamgee, you know. It's like even the chosen ones, like Harry Potter. He always has Ron Weasley by his side. Ron is kind of like Harry's Samwise, you know. The whole thing with the sword being reforged is really cool too, with Aragorn coming into kingship. The Grey Havens being the place when they leave at the end of the third movie, when the elves take off. I think that scene it's really sad because Frodo's going away with them, but it's really beautiful, like the scenery and stuff. Which I don't know if they're taking off. It looks like Rivendell, but it could be a different elven city, maybe one that's more on the western coast of Middle-earth, because Rivendell is kind of far into the continent. Alrighty, I'm going to read a little bit of lore. Not much from the appendix. So the Númenórean kings. Part 1, Númenor. Fëanor was the greatest of the Eldar in arts and lore. So he is an elf, it looks like, but also the proudest and most self-willed. And we see that similar theme with, it's always the most beautiful and the most skilled and the most talented and such that always has the pride. And we see the same with the whole Lucifer story as well. Fëanor was the greatest of the Eldar in arts and lore, but also the proudest and most self-willed. He wrought the 3 jewels, and of course we see the number 3 again. The Silmarilli, and filled them with the radiance of the 2 trees, Telperion and Laurelin, which could probably be equated to the tree of knowledge and the tree of life, that gave light to the land of the Valar. The jewels were coveted by Morgoth, the enemy, who stole them, and after destroying the trees, took them to Middle-earth and guarded them in his greatest fortress of Thangordrim. And there's probably some correspondence between like Morgoth and Sauron and the Ringwraiths and all of this stuff in the Clepothic tree, the tree which goes underneath the tree of life. Fëanor forsook the Blessed Realm and went in exile to Middle-earth, leading with him a great part of his people, for in his pride he purposed to recover the jewels from Morgoth by force. A little more history on the Silmarils. Morgoth eventually becomes overthrown. Arendelle. So where did Arendelle come from? You have Fëanor. I'm trying to see who this Fëanor is. There's so many different characters. This is why the Silmarillion is so hard to read. It's hard to keep track of all this stuff. Moving down anyway, because I'm just reading certain lines. Together they wrested a Silmaril from the iron crown of Morgoth. Luthien became mortal and was lost to elvenkind. Dior was her son, Elwing his daughter, and had in her keeping the Silmaril. Going further down the page, Morgoth was overthrown. Arendelle was not permitted to return to mortal lands, and his ship bearing the Silmaril was set to sail in the heavens as a star. That's interesting. And a sign of hope to the dwellers in Middle-earth oppressed by the great enemy or his servants. The Silmaril alone preserved the ancient light of the 2 trees of Valinor before Morgoth poisoned them. sounds like the Kapathic tree, you know, breaking down the tree of life before the fall. It was in its pristine condition. So yeah, I mean, I think I've covered, you know, pretty much everything, you know, I want to say about the Lord of the Rings. It's a beautiful story. There's not really much I can add to the lore that J.R.R. Tolkien himself does for the books, but I just wanted to give kind of my occulty, like mystical, you know, ceremonial magician, like insights to a little bit of the Lord of the Rings. And if that is something you want me to actually go through the book and pick out key things and try to talk about, you know, how they might relate to ceremonial magic and all these other things, I could do that. But really, I'm looking more to, in the future videos, to, this was kind of a nice side thing to do. But I'd like to get back into the Archangel videos. I'm going to start Archangel Michael videos. And I would also like to get back into morals and dogma, things that are more kind of in the direction of my book that I'm working on. So I'm trying to not get spread too much. There's also like a Wiccan video I could do at some time. I have, what's the name of the book over there? Oh, knock this one over. Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft is sitting on the shelf, and I think there's some really interesting parts in there. They talk about some of the Wiccan ritual and stuff in there that's really cool and reminiscent of other mystery schools, whether it be Freemasonry or the Golden Dawn, OTO, etc. So, alright, this has already been split into 2 videos, so if you watched both of them, thank you. Even if you just watched one, thank you. So, everyone take care. Hopefully you got something from this, and until next time, peace, love, and tranquility, manifesting heaven on earth, one day at a time. Peace.